Today's daf Ezrus Hashem is daf Pei Zayin. Pei Zayin. Daf Pei Zayin is the daf, and we will begin Pei Vav Amid Beis. Zok the Mishnah. Mishnah says Bas Yisrael Shenisas L'Kohen. Remember, this Mishnah is a funny thing. If you remember what Jacqueline Kennedy said, you get married 3 times. The first time is
three times. He said 3 times.
3 times
for love, for money, and for companionship.
That's right. So this is what this Mishnah is talking about, a woman who got married 3 times, but not to Goyim, but to Yidden. But the first time she gets married is Bas Yisrael Shenisas L'Kohen. She got married to a Kohen Toichal B'Truma. She could eat Truma. Mace, let's say the husband died, V'lo Hemed Ben, but she has a child from that husband. She has a son, a Kohen. So Toichal B'Truma, she could continue eating Truma, right? Because she has a son that's a Kohen. Now in her second marriage, we'll call that for money, Nisis LeLevi, she married a Levi. So there, once she married somebody else, she can no longer eat Truma, but she has the advantage of what? Toicha b'maser. She can eat Meiser Rishon. This is Mishnah's Rameir, that Meiser Rishon is specifically for a Levi or the wife of a Levi. Mace, let's say the second husband dies, V'lo Hemena Ben, and she has a son from the second husband, Toicha b'maser. She can eat the Meiser. Why? Because she still has a son that's a Levi. Now remember, she still has a son that's a Kohen, but she got married to a Levi, now has a son, a Levi. Her husband is not around. She can continue eating Masa. Comes along the Mishnah, let's say in her third marriage, Nisas Yisrael, she married a Jewish man, a regular Yisrael. So there, now she's ready, goes after the husband. She's married to a Yisrael. No longer, she can no longer eat Truma or Meiser. Okay? Now, think about what's going to happen now. She has a third husband. Now, Mace, the third husband died, so this is not a good woman to marry. But she had a son from the third husband, so she has a Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael. Those are her 3 children from 3 different marriages. So because she has the Yisrael, she can't eat Truma and Maisa. But what happens? Mace Benom Yisrael, the third boy from the Yisrael died. So then she reverts back to the marriage, so she has nothing to remember the third husband by. So therefore, she goes back to the second husband of Toicha B'Masa. She could eat Masa. She could eat Meiser Rishon. Mace Benom Levi. Let's say the son from the Levi died, right? The son from the Levi died. So now the son from the Israel died. The son from the Levi died. So what's left? The son from the Kohen. So Toicha B'Truma, she could go back to eating Truma. But Noyalenu Meis Benom Kohen, if the third son died, their first son basically, and the son of the Kohen died, so now she's just a regular Bas Yisrael with no family. Loi Toichal B'Truma, Loi B'Masa. She can't eat Truma, she can't eat Maisa, because she's a Bas Yisrael. She goes home to her original house, and she doesn't have the rights to eat Truma Masa. That is the first case of the Mishnah with 3 marriages. We go to Pei Zayin Umid Aleph. The next part of the Mishnah states Nachazach. Bas Kohen Shenisas Yisrael. The opposite case. A Bas Kohen, okay, she's a daughter of a Kohen. All her life, she was eating Truma, yeah, because she's a daughter of a Kohen. Her father had Truma in the house. But she got married to a Yisrael. Loi Toichal B'Truma. What's that? Hi, Lewis. We're just starting Pei Zayin Amud Aleph. Bas Kohen Nisas Yisrael. Bas Kohen that married a Jewish man. So all her life she was eating Truma, but now she married a Jew, a Yisrael, Loi Toicha B'Truma. She has no right to eat Truma anymore. She goes after her husband. Now she made the second marriage. Mace, I'm sorry. She had died, but she had a son from this marriage, a Yisrael. She can't eat Truma because she has a son that's Yisrael. Nisis LeLevi, in her second marriage, she married a Levi. This Bas Kohen married a Levi, Toichel Masa. She can eat Masa Rishon because she's the wife of a Levi. And therefore, even though she has a son that's a Yisrael from the previous marriage, but she's now married to a Levi, she has the right to eat Masa Rishon. Meis V'lo Hemena Ben. Let's say he died, the Levi died, and she has a son from him. Toicha b'masa. She continued to eating masa because she has a son. a surviving son from that marriage, the Levi. Nisis the Kohen, but let's say in her third marriage, this Bas Kohen married a Kohen, so now she could eat truma, not because of her home, because she's now married to a new Kohen. So Teicha B'Truma because of her husband. Nes v'lahe met a ben. Let's say he died and she had a son from him. Teicha B'Truma, she can continue eating truma because just because her husband, the Kohen, died, she has a son that's a Kohen. She could eat truma. So now, going in the reverse order, she has a older son that's Yisrael, a lady, and a Kohen from 3 different marriages, right? Meis Benam Kohen. Let's say the son from the Kohen died, so her husband from the Kohen died, and now she doesn't have her son from the Kohen. She can't eat truma anymore. Meis Benam Levi. Let's say the second son from the Levi died, right? Her second son, when she was married to this Levi, died. So now she has nothing left from that Levi marriage. Like Toicha B'Masa, she can't eat Masa Rishon anymore. Meis Benam Yisrael. Her third son, her first older son from the first marriage, died. So now all she is a Bas Kohen with the experience of 3 marriages, 3 sons, and from different marriages, and they all died. So now she reverts back. She goes back to her father's house, and she's just, at the end of the day, a Bas Kohen with no family. She goes back. The pasuk says, I want to bring up the pasuk. This is a famous pasuk in Parshas Emor. Bas Kohen. If she married a what? She married a Yisrael, let's say. She can't eat truma when she's married to Yisrael. Says the pasuk, Kisiya almana ugrusha. She became divorced or widowed from that guy. V'zera Einon, she has no children from that marriage. Then V'shava el Beisavia, she goes back to her father's house. Kinurel, like she was a young girl. Milechem avia teichel, she can eat from her father's bread, meaning she could go back to eating truma. That's what this pasuk says, and this is exactly the case. She's a Bas Kohen, bereft of her children. She goes back home, and now she has the right to eat leg. Now, the Mishnah said, Meis Benami Levi Toicha Betruma. In the first case of the Mishnah, right, that the guy, the lady had a son that was a Kohen. He had a son that was a Kohen, a son that was a Levi, and a son that was Yisrael, right? And she was a Bas Yisrael. So let's say the son from the Yisrael died, the son from the Levi died. Now she goes back to eating truma because, why? Because she was at one time married to a Kohen, and she has a surviving son from that marriage, and it's the only surviving son from all of her marriages, and therefore she could go back to eating truma because at one time she was married to a Kohen. The hadra achlam mishum bana, because she can revert back eating because she has a surviving son from that marriage. Minalam, how do we know when the husband, the Kohen dies, when a husband, a woman who has a husband who's a Kohen that dies, she can continue to eating truma as long as she has a son from that marriage. Amarav Amarav, bas ubas. The pasuk says, ubas kohen kisiya almana grusha v'zera ein law. So we darshan, that means that as long as she doesn't have a son, then she goes, we darshan, v'zera ein law means that if she has a son, then as long as she has a son from that marriage, she can continue to go back to eating truma. She could go back to eating truma. That's what the Rabasi says. So that's what the Gemara says. So now, Amar Rab Abba, ubas. That's what we darshan it, because it says an extra vav to include this case, that if a woman is coming back to eating truma because of her son, she can come back also v'shav el beisaviyah. The extra vav in that pasuk. Come on, Rabbi Akiva to Darish Vavi. Are you saying it is that is the only Rabbi Akiva's opinion, who darshans always the extra vav in psukim? Rabbanan say extra vav and psukim are not strong enough to make a drasha from it. And says the Gemara, even the Rabbanan will hold this case. Bas you say the whole ubas is an extra word. Look at the pasuk. The first pasuk says ubas koyen ba ba ba, and the next koyen, which talks about a woman that goes back to eating truma, it says the word bas koyen. That's extra. This whole word is extra because I know it from the previous pasuk. So this word comes to marba a certain case that a woman that's married to a kohen, if she still has a surviving son from that kohen, she could go and continue to eating truma and go, even if she married somebody else in between and there was a interruption of her eating of truma because she was married, let's say, to a Levi or Yisrael and she had children. When all is said and done, if that all that remains in her life, that first marriage boy, that son, she goes back and eats truma because of that person, because of that son. Tana Rabbanim, the rabbis taught, when a woman loses a bas kohen, okay, let's say a bas kohen married to a Yisrael, correct? She can't eat truma. Her husband dies. She has no children from that Yisrael. She goes back to her father's house. Wait, her father was a kohen. Her father had two types of things in the refrigerator. One was truma and one was kachim, sacrificial from the temple. So she's not permitted. Tana Rabbanan, she chayzeres, when she comes back to eat chayzeres the truma, ve'eino chayzeres lechazav v'shoik. She goes back only to eat truma, but not to eating karbonis. These are the other gifts that the kohen gets because he works in the Beis Hamikdash. Amar Rav Chizda, Amar Ravina bar Shila Maikra. What's the pasuk? What is the pasuk that tells you not? In other words, I would think V'shava el Beisabiyah, she goes back home, kinurel, like she's a young girl. When she was a young girl, she was eating kachim and truma. So why, when she got married in between and had an interruption, and now she's coming back alone, why can't she go back and eat kachim? Because there's a pasuk that says, "He b'srumas hakachim loy seichel, b'amura min hakachim loy teichel." It's a drasha that from this word loy seichel, that means it seems to imply that this is a forever thing. And once you leave your father's house to get married, b'trumas hakadashim, on truma, on kachim type of something that's taken from a sacrificial animal, given as a gift to a kohen, loy soichel, she can never go back to eat it. So that is a pasuk that tells you that she can only eat truma, but she can't go back to eating kachim. Rav Nachman, Omar Rabba Bavua, Omar, he says another pasuk that says, look at the pasuk. The pasuk says that when you go back home, you misbas kohen, who was married to Israel, and now you're widowed with no children. The pasuk says milechem aviyotaycha. Let's see the pasuk. She goes back home. V'shavel beisaviyah. Go back home. Kinurel, like she's a young girl. Milechem, from one of the breads of her father, she can eat. Mi means one of from, some of it. Lechem refers to all types of food that the father has. Truma and kachim. So if it tells you only part of it, it means that she could only eat truma, but not mi lechem or kol lechem. Prat lechazav v'shoik. We exclude chazav v'shoik. Kachim. She doesn't get chazav v'shoik. She can't eat kachim. Now the Gemara asks just a side question, and this really has some question the place of this Gemara. The Gemara just wants to know, when a woman was married to somebody, let's say a guy has a daughter, she got married to somebody, and now that husband died, she's coming back home. How do you know? Maybe when the Torah says she comes back home, that means the father can nullify her nedarim. We know that a father has the right to nullify the nedarim, the promises and the vows of his daughter. So how do you know? Maybe when the Torah is telling you that this woman returns home, her father can now nullify the nedarim. That means maybe the pasuk is telling you that the father cannot be made for a neder, cannot nullify the vows, and that's what I need the pasuk that's saying that she's not really returning back home. She's not exactly returning back home. So I need all these extra words to teach you that the father cannot no more nullify the nedarim. Amar Rava, that we don't need a pasuk to that. In the Shiva Rabbi Yishmael said that's an obvious thing. When a girl gets married, her father loses all rights for her. Not only that, the Tanu Bei Rabbi Yishmael, the Neder Almana Grusha Yakom Aleh, Matar Merloima, V'halei Mutz Miklal Al, V'mutz Miklal Baal. When a woman gets married, she already went out of her father's jurisdiction. And now she got married, and now her husband died. She's already out of the jurisdiction of her father. So, of course, she's responsible for her own vows, and the father cannot no longer nullify her, even though she's moving back home. So what is the pasuk saying? It's obvious what the pasuk is saying, that an almana gets the right to keep her own promises. Ella, it comes to teach you another big chiddush. Harei shemasa av lishluchei habal. Let's say the father didn't marry her off, but gave his daughter over for marriage to the messengers of the husband. If this is right before the wedding, she said, go with the messengers of the husband. You're not in my rishus anymore. Or the father's messengers with the daughter gave the daughter over to the messengers of the husband. And what happened was that she never got married. She never got married. And the husband, the bride, the groom to be died. Does she go back to her father's, or was she married? The teaches you, this is the point. If once a girl leaves the jurisdiction of her father, her father has no right to nullify any vows. That's it. You leave your father's house, finished. Okay, back to the Gemara. Again, we're talking about a woman that left her father's house, a Bas Kohen. Now she's coming back and to her father's house. So we say she can eat the truma food, but she can't eat kachim. How do I know that? Safra Amar Rav Safra says, Milechem avia toichel. The pasuk says she goes back home and eats bread. Lechem v'loy basar. She goes back home and eats bread and not meat. Meat is usually associated with sacrificial meat. So here you see it that the pasuk says she only could eat truma. Rav Papa Amar Rav Papa says milechem avia toichel. The lechem, the food that belongs to her father, she could eat, which is truma. Truma is the possessions of the kohen. Lechem akonu la'avia, the bread that's totally owned by her father, which is truma, that she can eat. Prat, this excludes the chaz of ishoik, kachim food, the mishulchan gavoya kazachet. It really never belongs to the kohen. He may have it in his refrigerator, but it belongs to the table of Hashem. And therefore, she doesn't go back. And when she returns, she can only eat food that belongs only to her father, not kachim. The Rava says from this pasuk, the Torah says that a kohen eats these gifts, the breast and the foreleg. These are his kachim food. And the Torah says, you, your sons, and your daughter with you. Bisman she'ita. So they could only eat when they're with you, right? But not when they leave you. So that when they leave you for a minute, then they can't. Then they don't go back and eating the kachim food. Only when they're growing up in your house, they have a right to eat that kachim food. When they leave, that's it. Amar Rav Ada bar Ahava. But what would be the case in our Mishnah? If you want to see it visually, maybe I have it here. Our case in the Mishnah is this Bas Yisrael, right over here. This Bas Yisrael, this Bas Yisrael that was. Let me just get it right over here. This Bas Yisrael, right over here in the picture, I have it, was married to a Kohen. Then she married a Levi, then she married Yisrael, and all of her children died. Now, all of her children died, right? Meis Benam Yisrael, Meis Benam Levi. When this is what the discussion is. Meis Benam Levi, right? When her son from the Levi died, she goes back to eat truma. Here, she could go back not only to eat truma, but she could eat kachim as well. Because at one time she was married to a kohen. That was her first husband, and she still has the surviving son kohen, because only the Levi died. Her son from the Levi died, and the son from the Israel died. So she still has one surviving son from that kohen. She could return now to eat truma, but not only truma, but she can eat chaz v'shaik. She can eat kachim. Very different when she's going back to her father's house. That's what the Gemara is now saying. Amar of Adabar Ahava Tana. If a woman is coming back because she lost her husband and she's going back to her father's house to eat because she's a Bas Kohen, the truma, she goes back home and she can eat truma, but she can't eat kachim. But b'shvil b'na, if she's coming back after the interruption from because of different marriages, she's now coming back to eating truma because she still has a surviving son from a kayin. She could even eat chazav v'shaik. She could even eat kachim. Also, Rav Mordechai Amar l'shmaitze kamed Ravashi. So Rav Mordechai said this teaching in front of Ravashi. Ama meheicha kumas rabia miubas miadifa lo mimei. How do you know that a son can feed her mother? His mother. You only know it from the same pasuk that teaches you about a bas kohen returning home. So just like a bas kohen that returns home, just like a bas kohen that returns back to her father's house, she could only eat truma, not kachim. So also a woman who was married to a kohen, and she interrupted eating truma because she got married to a Levi in Israel. When she comes back, she shouldn't be any better. She shouldn't be any better than a bas kohen, since they seem to be derived almost from the same pasuk. Answers the Gemara, Hasam ksiv mi'utei, hacha lo ksiv mi'utei. True, it's from the extra word ubas kohen, but these mi'uta, milechem, kinurel, were only said by a woman going v'shava el beis avia. The limitations were only said by if she was turning to her father's house, then she only goes back to truma. But if she's going back because she still has a surviving kohen son, and that's why she's coming back to eating truma, because she interrupted eating truma because she was married to a Levi or Yisrael, she can even go back to eat kachem. New Gemara. Tana Rabbanan. V'shava el beis aviyah. The pasuk says that v'shava el beis aviyah prat l'shemeres yavam. That she goes back to her father's house as long as she's not waiting to be yibam. She lost her husband and she's a bas kohen. She should go back home and live with her parents. But if she's waiting for yibam, she can't eat truma, right? Kinurel, like she's a girl, prat l'mubaris. If her husband died and left her pregnant, then she can't eat truma. She has a potential baby in her stomach from a Yisrael. So therefore, she doesn't eat truma. So the Gemara says, V'laydinu, well, why do I need this pasuk to teach you that excluding a pregnant woman, that she doesn't go back to her father's house? It's obvious. I'll learn it from a kal v'chomer. Ma b'makom shloi also vlad min arishin kevlad min ashenu lepaitra min yibam. What we're trying to say over here is that yibam is a weaker thing. Why? Because in the following case, and this word vlad min arishin is like vlad finasheni is going to come up now a few times, which means like this: a man was married to a woman. She had a son, right? So, and then the man died. Fine. She goes ahead and marries somebody else, and she has no children from the second husband. Well, and that husband dies. What do you think? She falls to Yibam. Even though she has a son from the first husband, but they're not related. She didn't have a son from the second husband. She will fall to Yibam. So that first Vlad does not pater her from Yibam. But nevertheless, by Yibam, also Uber Kiyulid. The fact is that if a woman whose husband died left her pregnant, she doesn't fall to Yibam, because a pregnant woman is like one that giving birth. So Yibam has these qualifications. But Truma has a stronger qualification. Let's say a Bas Kohen was married to a man. Bas Kohen was married to a man. She has a child, a Yisrael. So now she goes ahead and gets married to somebody else. And she has no children from the second guy. And then that second Yisrael dies. She still doesn't go back home to eat truma because she still has a son from the first husband. So we don't say the Torah says that we make the son of the first marriage as if you had a son from the second marriage. Doesn't matter. You're still not you still are disqualified from eating truma. So certainly that should apply, that a pregnant woman should be considered as giving a birth. In other words, the question is, what do I need this kinurel to exclude pregnant woman? I would have learned it from a kal v'chomer. So the Gemara says, you don't learn it from a kal v'chomer. Why? Mali asa ubekilid le'in yibim. The yibim is stronger because her asa mason kachayim. We make dead people like alive people. This is a very important concept by Yibam. A woman who had a son, so therefore, when her husband dies, she doesn't fall to Yibam. If she gets married to somebody else, and then her son dies, you don't say, oh, now she should go back to fall to Yibam from the first marriage. No, we consider her dead son as if he's alive. So by Yibam, you have that concept: the dead son is considered to be alive. So therefore, nasu uber kiyila, by truma, therefore by Yibam, we always say pregnant is as if it's born, because dead is considered alive, pregnant is considered born. In truma, shaloi also mason k'chaim. By truma, we don't find that idea. Mason are considered alive. In other words, once a person has a son, let's say a woman who had a son that's a kohen, her husband died, and she had a son that's a kohen. Once that boy dies, she doesn't need truma. So we don't say, oh, we always consider him to be alive. He's dead. Once he's dead, he's dead. So therefore, truma is weaker than yibam. So that's why I need the pasuk to teach you the din of mu'uberes, that it also applies by truma. Talmud Bavli Daf Yomi, that excluding a mu'uberes is considered to be a born child, and therefore she will not return home if she's pregnant. If her husband died, a bas kohen whose husband died, she will not return home if she's pregnant. Now, here's the catch. The pasuk says that if you have a child, she can't go home. In other words, a bas kohen has a son, she can't go home. Not only if she has a son, she can't go home, but if she's just pregnant from that Yisrael, she doesn't go home. Why do I have to tell you both ideas? Just tell me pregnant or son. Why do I need both? The Torah needed to write you that a pregnant woman, a bas kohen that's pregnant from a Yisrael, she doesn't go back home. And a woman that doesn't have children, or if she does have children, she doesn't go home either. The ikos of Rahman Zera Ein Law. If the Torah would only write that a woman who has children does not return back home, a bas kohen, I would say, because mikora chad gufa, in the beginning, she was one person. She was a young girl before she got married, when she's living in her parents' house, and then basha trei gufa. Now she has a child. Therefore, if she still has a child from that marriage, she cannot go back home and eat truma. Avamol beres, I would think if it's just that she's pregnant, the mikara chad gufa v'hashta chad gufa ema techel, I would think that she could eat, because in the beginning she was one body, and the second she's just a little heavier. So I would think she could eat truma. Tzricha. If the Torah just write that uberes, if she's pregnant, she doesn't go home. The mikara gufa srika, we go Ahmed Beis. The mikara gufa srika, bahashta gufa malia. In the beginning, she was what? Empty. She didn't have. Her body was empty. She had nothing in her womb. And therefore, and now her body is full. That's why if she's pregnant, she doesn't return home. Avazera ain't. But if she would have a child, I might think she could eat truma. Why? Because look at her herself without looking at the child. The mikara gufa srika v'hashta gufa sricha emaloi sricha. At the beginning, she had it empty. She had nothing. When she left her father's house, she was just a woman, nothing in her womb. When she's coming back with a child, there's still nothing in her womb. So therefore, I might think if that woman, Taka, would be able to eat truma again. So that's why we both psukim. So what you just learned over here is that, yes, the Torah says that a woman who's a bas kohen, if she totally lost her family, she goes back home and eats truma again. But if she's pregnant, or if she has a child, she cannot go back home and eat truma again. If she has a child that's from a Yisrael, right? A child from a Yisrael, or she's pregnant from the Yisrael and her husband died, she doesn't go back home and eating truma. And we needed to write both psukim. We'll finish the parak, and then we'll just start the next Mishnah. Amalei Rav Yehuda mid the Askar Rava. Now, here's the situation. It's a fascinating situation that we're talking about. A woman who lost her husband, right? But she has a child, so she doesn't fall to Yibam. She gets married to somebody else, right? And its marriage is going fine. But then her child from the first marriage died, right? So why don't we say, what the Gemara is trying to say is, Let's interrupt the second marriage and require her to have a chalitza from the first marriage. She should come out that we should require her to have a chalitza from the first marriage, because now we see the son didn't live and the first husband died without children. That's what the Gemara says. Let us not say the dead kid kechayim should be alive regarding Yibam, and we should require her to have a chalitza from the first marriage, although she's married to the second person. And the Gemara makes a kal b'chayma. By truma, we don't make mason come alive. Dead people are as if they're alive. Since Yibam is more chumerdik, we should not make dead people come alive. Answers the Gemara an interesting teretz that the reason why is the Torah's ways are pleasant, and therefore it would be such a strange thing that in the middle of a marriage that this woman, we tap her on the shoulder and say, wait a second, your son just died and you're feeling sad. Your son from your first marriage just died. Guess what? You're now falling to Yibam from the first marriage. And that will cause like a shalom bayis problem with the second husband, because now she has to go get a chalitza from the previous marriage. So therefore, that cannot be. We automatically assume that if a man died and he left children, his wife never will fall to Yibam, even if subsequently the child died. Then the Gemara asks another question. The Gemara is saying that a woman who was a Bas Yisrael, she was married to a Kohen. The Kohen died, but she had a child with him. Let us say that even when that child dies, she should forever eat truma, because at one time she had a child from that Kohen. Because by Yibam we say also Mason Kachayim, Yibam, which is weaker than Truma, we say Mason are like alive. Let us say that by Truma that this halacha should apply as well. That a dead child, we should consider him as if he's alive, and she should forever, for the rest of her life, be able to eat Truma, because at one time she had a child from that Kohen. Talmud Loima v'zera ein la. The Torah says you don't have children alive from that marriage to the Kohen. You cannot eat truma v'ein la, and at the end of the lane, she doesn't have. Another question that Gemara asks: we should require. Remember this case. The case was a woman got married. First marriage, her husband died, but she had a child from that first husband. Then she got married a second time to somebody else, no children from the second marriage, and now the second husband died, but she had no children from the second marriage. She falls to Yibam. Why don't we say, oh, but this woman has a child from a previous marriage, she shouldn't fall to Yibam? Why don't we say that? By Truma, you say that. If you say that idea by Truma, and Yibam was more stricter, because she has a child from the first one, should be considered as if she has a child from the second one, and therefore she should fall to Yibam. Answers the Gemara, the pasuk says, as long as you don't have children from the second marriage, I don't care what you had children from a previous marriage, but if you don't have child from this person that you were married to, you fall to Yibam. That's the pasuk. And one more thing, she doesn't have. Why is it that if a woman, this is the case, a woman who was married, a Bas Kohen that was married to a Bas Kohen that was married to a Yisrael, she has a son that's a Yisrael. Then that husband died. She got married again, and she has no children from the second husband. Oh, so she just has a child from the first husband, a Yisrael. Why don't we say, because she got married a second time and she had no children, she should go back home now and eat truma, despite having a child from the first husband that's a Yisrael? Why don't we say that? Because that same idea works by Yibam. If it works, we don't say that it works by, we don't count the children from the first marriage by Yibam, so we shouldn't also count it. We shouldn't count what you have from the first marriage by Truma. If by Yibam it doesn't, we don't count it, so we shouldn't count it by Truma. When do you go back home is if you have no children from no marriages. From any marriage, this Bas Kohen that was married to anybody, when does she go back home like a young girl is only if she has no children remaining from the marriages. But she still was married one time, and she has a son that's Yisrael. Therefore, in that case, she would not go back home to eat truma. Okay, let's do the Mishnah. The next 3 minutes to do the Mishnah, and it's a very important Mishnah. This happened a lot after World War II, but you get the basic idea. Ha'isha shahalach ba'ala l'medina siyam. A woman, her husband went to another overseas trip, and we never heard from him again. Right? Uvo v'amrla neis balach, and one person came and told him, your husband died. Benisas, and because based on that testimony of that one person, normally you need two people, but one person came and said testimony, and Bezdin, she went to Bezdin, and Bezdin said, okay, you could get married, and she got married. And then her husband showed up. So now she's married to guy number 2, and her first husband just showed up. This was a huge issue. Teitze mizeh umizeh. She has to get divorced from both of them, because even though you could think about it, she should go back to her first husband, but at the end of the day, because she got married to the second guy and she was negligent about researching it more on her own, so we knas her and say she can't be with the second husband. And it's almost like she was mazana as an ish beratzai. She needs a get from both of them. In other words, she can't go back to the first husband who she originally was married. She needs a get. But she also needs a get from the second husband, even though technically, if you look at it, she never really got married to the second guy because she was still married to the first guy. He just wasn't around. But you still need to get from the second husband. And the ein lo ksuba, she lost her ksuba, v'lei peres, v'lei mezoines, v'lei belois, both husbands don't have to give her a ksuba or pay her back for the benefit of the payros that they ate from her nichsei meluk. We'll discuss that. She doesn't get food while she's waiting for the get. She doesn't get compensated for her old clothing, not from the first husband, not to the second husband. The natla mizeh mizeh, she did take it, tax there, she goes back. She has to return it. Vahavlad, let's say she had a baby from the second husband, right? From the second husband, the kid's a mamzer. Even if she went back to the first husband, her original husband, it's a mamzer. Chazal said, you're not allowed to go back to the first husband. If you do go back to the first husband, the child will be a mamzer midrabanan.
What about the child from the first husband? Is he a mamzer too?
Yeah, if she goes back after this story to the first husband and says, you know what, I'm not listening to Chazal, and I'm going to stay married to my first husband, and then has a child,
so you're breaking up. Sound is breaking up.
Yeah, Vahavlad mamzer mizeh umizeh. That means that if she goes back to the first husband and has a child with the first husband, that child will be a mamzer. Now, really, it's only a mamzer midrabana, because she's originally married to that person, but she was not supposed to go back. Let's look at the Rashi. In Yolda Misheni, if she has a child, Mamza Mizem Zezuk Rashi, Yolda Misheni, she had a child from the second one, Mamza Goma. That's a complete Mamza, because she's married to the first guy. She had no right to get married to the second guy. The Imshuv Hekzira Rishon, if the first one takes her back, the Yolda line had a child with him, have a Mamza Midivreim, the Rabbanan said that that's a Mamzer. In other words, the Rabbanan were really strict on this lady, that you didn't research the whole thing. You decided, I didn't hear from my husband, and 1/8 said he died, and I'm going to rely on that person and be done with him. So she can never go back to him. Both of them cannot go to her levaya if they're kohanim. They're not. There's no marriage there, because if she finds something, it doesn't belong to her husband. Her wages belong to none of the husbands. Nobody can nullify her neder. Hoisi bas Yisrael, if she's a Jewish girl, nifsala min kahuna. Of course, she can never marry a kohen even in a third marriage. Why? Because she did znus. She was like an ashes ish that did znus. Ubas Levi min Maisa, Ubas Kohen min Truma. If she was a daughter of a Levi, she can never eat Maisa Rishon again. And never, if she's a Kohen, she can never eat Truma. Then Yoshin Shazel, the Yoshin Zeh as Ksuba. So nobody can get her Ksuba, even though they're not giving Ksuba. The Gemara is going to discuss that. Then Mesu, if they die, let's say that both husbands died. Achav shel zeh v'achav shel zeh chosim v'lo miyabnim. Now, both of the brothers can do, the brother of the second one does chalitza because she wasn't really married to the second one. But even the brother of the first one could only do chalitza, not yibam, because of what she just did. It's like almost like her first marriage, went up in smoke. So if he died in the interim before getting a get, then she would fall to yibam, but she could only do chalitza with that brother. Rabbi Yossi disagreed. He says, in this case, ksubasa al dichse bal arishan, the ksuba, the first husband still has to pay for the ksuba. Rabbi Loza arishan zakam mitziyasev ma'asideh v'faras neder. Rabbi Loza says that the first husband still has rights to her whatever she finds, if she wins a lottery ticket or her wages, and he still has rights to nullify her neder. So we still consider the first husband. And Rab Shimon says, Rab Shimon says that with the first husband, yes, we want her to get a get from that first husband. But if he dies, then she would fall to Yibam, because at one time they were really, really married. So the first husband, she would fall to Yibam, and this first husband's brother can do Yibam on this woman. Now, finish the Mishnah. Then Nisa Shaloi Bershus. Let's say she actually had two witnesses that came and said your husband died. Two witnesses, then she doesn't even need to go to court. Two witnesses are so then if the two witnesses turned out they got it wrong, and she got married to somebody else, then you don't blame her, because actually it was two witnesses that came. She didn't even need the permission of Bezdin. She had two witnesses. So if this happened, Muteris Lachsaloi, she's permitted to go back to the first husband. Nisus al pi Bezdin, if she, in the first case where she went with the permission of Bezdin to get married because there was only one aid, Teitze upatur min a carbon. She has to divorce, but she doesn't have to. She doesn't bring a carbon because she did it almost on purpose by marrying the second person. She didn't do any research. Loinisus al pi Bezdin, if she didn't rely on Bezdin, but she just relied on two eidim. So two eidim, two witnesses that said your husband died, you can't blame her for that mistake. So Teitze, she goes out from the second husband, but for chayavis b'carbon, she's obligated to bring a carbon. Yafa koyach Bezdin, the fact is that if you went with Bezdin's license to marry somebody, shepoitru min a carbon, she's not obligated to bring a carbon. Haru Bezdin li nase v'il holcha v'kilkala chayavis b'carbon she'tiru el li nase. If Bezdin, again, a woman she has only one witness that says her husband died, and they told her you could get married to somebody else. We'll take this witness, this one aid word for it that your husband died, and then she went ahead, instead of getting married, she did znus with somebody. She's chayav b'carbon because if she did it by mistake, thinking she's just a single girl, and that so if she just had an affair with somebody, she's chayav b'carbon because this is an accidental mistake. And she's an Ashes Ish, so she's chayav to bring a carbon because they only gave her permission to get married, not to do znus. Anyway, this is the topic of the perek, which is a very interesting topic, which came up a lot after the war. You didn't know if your husband was around, and you had one episode saw him in the camps, and then he didn't know. He said maybe he died in the gas chambers or whatever, and we don't know. So this is the whole topic of aguna and stuff like that, and that's the subject of this perek.
Fascinating. Very, very interesting.
Yeah. I'm sure this has come up, Guy is married, and a woman got married in 47, 48, and finally her husband shows up in 1951. It can do. I was behind the Iron Curtain. Who knows? Yeah.
Well, I would love to ask 100 questions, but I know that our time is